Thanks for joining today's webinar focused on the Anaplan platform and how it can help optimize your supply and demand planning. My name is Chris Manette. I'm a solutions consultant. I work for a company called Bedford Consulting, who I'll introduce in a second, but we're basically an implementation partner of Anaplan, working closely through the sales cycle and then obviously working with customers to actually implement the software, get their team trained up and using it. The plan for today's webinar, I'm going to spend about 5 minutes or so in PowerPoint just to take you through a background of Anaplan for those who aren't aware what it is, and then we'll spend most of the time in the product going through an example, starting with the demand side and how Anaplan can help through kind of a collaborative demand process, predictive statistical forecasting, feeding into the demand process as well, and how you can do your demand planning across multiple scenarios, and then we'll feed that through to the supplier side. Looking firstly at kind of an inventory replenishment point of view, and also how it can be used to optimize production planning, either by kind of distribution center or production line, down right into the detailed by SKU, by production line, where you should produce things, and obviously what the cost is as well. Just in terms of the PowerPoint first, as far as Bedford Consulting go, so we're the oldest and largest Anaplan focused partner in EMEA. Anaplan is all we do. We don't sell other software. We work exclusively on the platform. We have over 40 Anaplan experts, mostly on the kind of implementation consulting side. But obviously we help through the sales cycles as well if you're looking to purchase software, working closely with the account managers at Anaplan itself. At this stage, we've done, I think, more like 400 projects, implementations across customers, across about 150 or so customers. So you can see by those numbers, it's very usual for a customer to do more than one project within the Anaplan platform. We'll talk about the different use cases and how you can roll out the platform, how it can be used not only across the kind of S&OP demand and supply process, but also through into finance, IT, marketing, and how you connect these different parts of the business together. We're Partner of the Year for 2020, have been since they started the award, so 5 years running now. So we consider ourselves to kind of be experts in the platform, but spanning across every industry and every type of company. As far as Anaplan goes, so we describe it as a planning platform. So rather than kind of like a siloed system that has a single use case, it truly is a platform. It has kind of enterprise-wide governance, security, best practice around the technology, but then it's still very easy to use. An end user can build their own dashboards, their reports, and then the model builders within your business would actually own the logic of the system. If you want to enhance it, add in new structures, add in new logic, the idea is you can do that yourself, and we'll see a bit of that as we go through the demonstration today. It's built on the concept of different models. So in the same way you might have kind of different siloed systems, or you might have different kind of spreadsheet workbooks, for example. Anaplan looks to replace those with one or a series of models. These can be built from scratch. So I say it's very easy to use, so you can build the logic yourself. Or we have what we call the App Hub, where there's over 200 pre-built applications, again, spanning every use case that you can download, put your structures and your data into, and away you go. Or just use it for inspiration and just tailor it to your business, your requirements. And really the idea here is to connect people. It's all cloud-based. They can log into the platform. As they make a change, it syncs through the platform in real time. You can have workflows, so approvals, for example, all done through the platform. Hopefully my screen is keeping up. I saw it lag. That all goes through the platform, and obviously have the communications directly within that platform as well, rather than having spreadsheets, for example, sent around the business. Really, the core benefits focus firstly on time savings. So any time that's currently spent just validating data, checking data, going through a planning cycle and needing to consolidate the data up across all your products, all your production lines, your distribution centers, for example. It's hugely scalable, so you can go right down to kind of SKU level by day if you need to. Some customers go down into kind of 15-minute buckets, and you can choose the level of detail in the hierarchies to suit yourself. It's eliminating spreadsheets, which by their nature aren't really designed to be running kind of full business processes on, or perhaps kind of black box siloed systems, be it because they're out of date or because you can't actually understand what the logic is and need expensive consultants to come in and make any kind of simple change for you. It allows you to import any data that you have around the business, so connecting those different departments together, as well as any external data that you might want to bring in, just to give you either better analysis or to actually drive the planning process. And it's very flexible, so it allows you to make changes, spin up your scenarios very quickly, and do what if analysis, for example, on different impacts, as well as having, I mentioned, that kind of enterprise style audit. So one formula to span across your different hierarchies, meaning there's less risk of error, for example, and if there's something that you want to drill into, you can see exactly when the change was made and who made it, for example. As far as the use cases go, so I mentioned it spans all sorts of different use cases. This is where we talk about it being a platform. So obviously today we're focused on the pink area, that's supply chain side, but other frequent use cases span the world of finance. Obviously they can be linked as well, so you can have your demand and supply processes feeding directly into financial models, same way you might take feeds to and from workforce planning. So if you need to know how many staff you need to meet the demand, for example, you can integrate these models, have them owned by different people around the business, but all syncing together in real time in the same platform. Here's a kind of slightly more detailed honeycomb focused purely on the supply side here and some of the use cases that our customers are using Anaplan for. As far as kind of analysts go in the space, we're recognized as the connected planning pioneer. I talk about connecting those business cases across different departments. That's really what we're talking about when we talk about connected planning, rather than having completely different systems across the organization. So from Gartner, we're a leader across a whole series of quadrants, as well as other analysts there, like Forrester, etc. I'd urge you to do your own research as part of an evaluation. Customer-wise, so we span just about every single industry there is, customers down to kind of pre-revenue customers or customers with as little kind of 10 million or so pounds of turnover, all the way up to your global companies that you can see on the screen there. Use case-wise, some may be using it across the entire organization, some may be just using it for one or two use cases, as we saw on that honeycomb before. Obviously, we can provide more information on these customers if there's any that jump out at you. Specifically on some of the supply chain ones, there's case studies on the Anaplan website that you can look at for kind of more detail behind these, but just some of the benefits, or the realized benefits, should I say, that you can see on the screen there. Carter's, for example, saving $25 million in inventory carrying costs. We've got Sonos, and the people that make the smart speakers have cut out their data integration time by over 20 hours per week. Tata Steel, 2 to 3 times faster supply chain inventory planning, for example. So you can see some of the benefits there, and like I say, there's more detailed case studies on the website as well. Okay, so as promised, we did a short PowerPoint, and now we'll jump into the product itself. And I'll start off with the core concepts, kind of an overview of the platform, and then we'll go through that cycle, starting out with a build-up of a demand plan, and then through into the supply side as well. I should say, obviously, everyone's on mute, but there is a questions pane in your GoToMeeting toolbar. And feel free to enter any questions, and I'll either answer them as we go if they slot in, or we can also answer them afterwards and send you an email. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see a dashboard here. So let's just step through kind of the core concepts of the Anaplan platform. So firstly, in terms of the user experience, so it's all driven through this idea of dashboards. It's completely cloud-based, so as long as you have internet, you can get to your data, your workings, your model, just through any device. So if you have a phone or a tablet, there's an app that you can use, and everything will render down automatically to fit the device, or so you can use your PC. The idea behind the dashboards is that they're used not only for kind of reporting, analysis, slicing and dicing the data, drilling down into the detail, but they're also used for data entry. So if you have people actually entering in data as part of a demand plan in this case, they would do it directly through the dashboards, both kind of numerical data and any commentary or text fields that you want to put in here as well. What we're going to look at here is just an example of a model that's pre-built as an example model. Again, as I mentioned before, the idea is you can either build these models from scratch, obviously with the help of the team at Bedford, or you download the apps and kind of fit your business structures into it, depending on how closely they align, obviously. In terms of the dashboards here, so just to show you very quickly, again, completely customizable, as well as the models and the workings being customizable. You choose exactly how you want to display this information, what grids of data you want to bring in, any charts, KPIs, for example. Completely kind of self-serve. Even the end users can design and configure their own dashboards, maybe separate from a master set of dashboards that you want to push out to them. Kind of core concept number 2 is the idea of what we call multidimensionality. If any of you are kind of familiar with that from BI tools or maybe working with pivot tables in Excel, essentially it means that you build something once and then can slice it across different sets of data. So for example here, this is obviously one dashboard looking at our actuals firstly for the first 18 weeks of the year, and then forward into a forecast rolling out for until the end of the current year. But importantly, we have this drop down at the top. So in our company, we're selling golf equipment. We can see here for an individual golf club, this is the demand forecast, but I can use this drop down to slice between different products, see the actuals in the forecast at an individual SKU level like we have here. This is actually a concatenation with locations, but you can choose what the hierarchies are. So if you want to have a separate drop down for different locations, different countries, different customer types, for example, or individual customers themselves, you can choose exactly what hierarchies you want to put your data against and what level of detail you want to plan to. We'll see in this model's case, we plan the initial demand forecast at a location and a product level, and then we allocate it down to individual customers using historical data. But if you'd rather have your demand forecasters plan into that detail immediately, you can also do that as well. The idea behind these hierarchies not only means that you don't have to have multiple versions of the same report, you build one and you can slice through it. Also, it means that any aggregation, so up into total clubs, for example, is automatic and instant as you change numbers at the lower level, same way up into total products. All of that logic is embedded in the model. What it also means is that if you add in new SKUs as you move through time, for example, you don't have to touch any of the logic, the workings. You don't have to worry about amending dashboards, for example. You just add it into the central structure, either manually or so we can import it from whatever source system you use. And then that will be available for both reporting analysis and to plan against as well. In my case here, my second drop down that I have is just for different scenarios. So I can see just my actuals data and drill into that. Or I have multiple planning scenarios. This could be, budget version 1, version 2, and version 3. In my case, I've done kind of what if scenarios. So we have an expected case as scenario 1, I think a worst case situation as number 2, and a best case as number 3. And we'll look at that a bit more as we move through. But the concept's the same. I can use the same dashboard to plan across my different scenarios, as well as planning across my different SKUs that I have here. Final thing on the dimensions is the idea of security. So what it allows you to do is not only have a dashboard that relates to all of our products here, but if you have different managers in terms of different products, or perhaps you have different customer relationship managers and you want to filter the data by customer, you can set security against these hierarchies as well. So you can give the same dashboard out to 50 people, say, and then based on that security, they'll automatically be filtered and they'll only see the data that they're allowed to see based on their security. Security actually goes all the way down to kind of individual cell basis, if there's certain cells they're allowed to see and certain ones they're not. But obviously setting it at the hierarchy level, and this keeps it more dynamic, and you can set that either by individual or by role level as well. Final kind of core concept on here is just around the idea of the way the data entry works. So I'm just going to turn off the full year and just focus on the planning weeks here, because we can use this template as our planning dashboard. We have a baseline down here on this grid. So this is actually from our statistical forecast that we'll go and look at in a second. But you can see here, we've just got a simple manual adjustments line down the bottom. In the same way that you might type into a spreadsheet or the system, you can just go along here, type in your amendments, maybe too high, where you want to. Every single change that's made is tracked and auditable. So if I look at the data history for that particular cell for the last 24 hours, I can see exactly who changed it, what they changed it from and to, for example, and it's all tracked. I also have the idea of adding comments to go alongside it as well. So if I want to put an explanation as to why I put that number in, I can put any kind of comments, either at the kind of the cell by cell level or an overall dashboard level as part of a workflow process too. All of these changes, as I make them, ripple through the entire model. So not only will this 100 that I've entered in week 18 instantly roll up into my total products forecast, for example, it also syncs through any other dashboards that we have here. So through into kind of scenario comparisons, my allocation down into individual customers, and then crucially through into the supply side. So I can make any change to my demand numbers, say I'm going to expect 100 more units of this product in week 18, for example, and then immediately be able to see the impact on the supply side. So that's why we talk about this idea of connected planning, of connecting people and data together. As an individual makes a change, you can see the impact of that all the way through the business, all the way through your model instantly. Okay, and then the very final thing before I actually go through a planning process and start off with the statistical forecasting piece here, it's just around the logic. Like I mentioned before, it's completely owned by the business users, whoever they might be within the business. There's no scripting or coding that goes into the logic, the formulas. If I look at, this is a fairly simple one for a total here. If I drill down, I can see it literally is the forecast plus risks plus opportunities plus anything manual. It gives me my total, and I can see the individual components. If you're familiar with kind of Excel style syntax, if you know how to do a lookup maybe or a sum if formula, that's the kind of level of complexity that we're talking about. It's all plain English formulas. And importantly, you'll find that maybe if you have a spreadsheet that you use currently, what might be thousands of formulas where you have this same simple formula but copied across every single week, across every single SKU, across different scenarios, and therefore obviously the risk that one of those formulas will be wrong is very high. In Anaplan, this is a single formula. So this exists in the system once, and then if you add new SKUs, as the weeks move on to FY21 in this case, you don't have to touch the formula. It instantly rolls through. Makes audit a lot easier, and obviously that risk of error is a lot smaller as well. Okay, so they're really the core concepts. So just to recap, we had the kind of the interface, the dashboard itself, everyone using that for reporting, analysis, and for data entry as well. We have the idea of it being multidimensional, so slicing through the hierarchies, and you'll see more of those as we move through. We have the idea of the data entry, so not only is it all tracked and auditable, we have the idea of everything syncing through the entire model in real time. So really quick to do kind of what if scenarios, spin up a new forecast and see the impact of a single change because of the way the model links through. And then finally, the formulas and how the system's built in the first place. What we're going to do now is switch and actually start going through a sample process using some of the other dashboards in this model to guide us through. So if I start off just by jumping into the statistical forecast, because if you see here for our demand plan, we start off with our baseline, we give them a starting point. This could be kind of a simple run rate for some customers that don't have the history or perhaps launch frequent new products and you want to use some kind of alternate basis as the baseline. Obviously, there's any other method you want to use, average rolling weeks, those kind of options, or just start from scratch. But in our case, where we have some decent history for our SKUs, we're starting off with a statistical forecast. So let me drill in here and talk through that a little bit first. Okay, so we can see here we have our statistical forecast review. This is again for an individual SKU. So if I maybe pick just the first one here at the top, we can see our history. So the blue line here is the actuals. If I maybe take off our forecast, this can be imported from any source system, and Anaplan's completely agnostic when it comes to what data we import as that starting point. We can have it either kind of as a request, so you choose to download it and upload it via CSV for example, or we link directly into the source system, either on-premise systems or cloud systems. The method we use changes between what we call Anaplan Connect or Anaplan Hyperconnect, different APIs that we can connect with, but the option is still there. So we can connect to the source data and bring that in as frequently as you need. And then in this case, we're using statistical forecasting to give us that predicted forecast right down at the SKU by SKU level. So every single SKU will have its own methodology, its own forecast method based on that history and that volatility as well. If I start down bottom left, you can see here we've got the last 3 years of data. This particular SKU, fairly consistent, so slight uplift between the 3 years that we have here, but very similar seasonality. We'll talk a little bit about ones that are a bit more sporadic and harder to forecast here in a second. What we have here in this model, and again, you get it as one of the out-of-box applications if you buy Anaplan, is I think it's about 25 or so different statistical forecasting methods. So I don't understand what they all are. I don't know if you do, but hopefully you've got better things to do to understand every single forecast method that we have going down the list here. The important thing is that Anaplan will pick the best fit for you. So even if you don't understand what multiplicative decomposition is, Anaplan's going to look through all those 25 methods and then pick the one that is best suited to this particular data combination. So Driver Pro 9, for example, is using multiplicative decomposition. Another product will use a completely different method based on its history. The way it does that is basically by looking at effectively a variance. So it ranks that historical trend, that historical data against all of those methods, and then looks at the difference to pick that best fit. And again, we'll look at that in a second. Using that same method, that MAPE percentage I mentioned, that variance, not only can obviously see where, like this, it fits fairly well, there's only likely to be a 3% variance based on our statistical forecast. We can also rank them and see which ones are going to be furthest away. So if I choose this one that's got a high MAPE against it, for example, we can see here the history is a little bit more sporadic. We've got some jumps in certain years that don't repeat in others, and therefore it's harder just to use a statistical forecasting engine to get to our right data. What is it doing? There's no magic system that's going to tell you exactly how this product's going to act in the future if it's not got the history to give that trend. Instead, obviously, what we can do is flag this is an exception. And therefore, when the demand forecaster goes in, they have maybe a list of hundreds of SKUs to forecast. They know which ones to focus on, which ones to spend their time on, and which ones are likely to have, for example, if I just flip this round and sort it ascending instead, and which ones have a very low MAPE percentage. So you can see actually this one's fairly consistent. It's only likely to be about 3% off. So they get to prioritize their time, and perhaps they don't do any manual adjustment on this particular product here, but they focus their time on the ones where the statistical forecast is going to be further away based on that history. So it's really just giving you that idea of prioritization. The other side of prioritization is if you're used to the kind of the classic ABC, XYZ ranking of products to segment them. So the ABC being based on, I guess, some kind of either volume or revenue metric. Here we can actually choose. So if we rank them by volume, we can see 19 products fall into category A, for example. If I change this to sales, it will change the product split. It will change the arrangement based on the sales value, or we can choose margin instead, for example, and choose how we want to rank them. Essentially, it's a Pareto law style approach where we then know to focus on the products that make up the highest proportion of our volume in this case, or if I choose sales, the highest proportion of our revenue. And then we have the XYZ criteria. So effectively, how forecastable is it? What's the volatility on it? So again, if something is an X, we know it's not very volatile, so we don't need to spend too much time. If it's a Z, then it's more volatile, and perhaps we spend more of our time on the ones that are more volatile, especially if they make up a bigger percentage of our sales number. So again, just using the data, using some rankings to inform the demand planner, so they know what data to focus on when they're making their adjustments to it. Sorry, back here on the statistical forecast, I mentioned the idea of the different methods that we have. If I actually move through a couple of dashboards here, firstly, we can now see a pivoted view. So across all of our individual SKUs, we can see the ranking, we can see the best fit method that's been chosen for each. You can see it varies depending on the product that we're looking at. And you can see on this table here the different methods and how many products have been used against each of the different methods here. And if I click on this dashboard, we can actually see that for every single SKU, so in this case, we're looking at a set of irons here, it's actually done the calculations across every single statistical forecasting method that's in the system. And then it's ranked them using that history, using that variance percentage to show us that actually in this case, multiplicative decomposition is the best fit. If we chose to use something like a double moving average, we're likely to be further away with our statistical forecast than if we use multiplicative decomposition, and therefore that's the one that is chosen. So again, no kind of black box, everything's visible, you can drill into the analysis. In reality, you probably narrow it down, so rather than looking at all kind of 25 or over 30 statistical forecasting methods, you may just focus in on 3, 4, 5 methods that seem to be the most popular across your products, track them through time, see how they change, and obviously because it's not a black box, you get to understand what's actually happening, what the calculations are, and even add in your own if you do have kind of a data science team, for example. The only other thing just to show you here on the statistical forecasting piece is the idea of outliers. So either automatically, again, based on things like standard deviation in the quartile range, just to strip out any outliers. Could be just due to a one-off quirk, it could be a sale that you ran last year that you're not planning to run this year. Again, where we talk about connected planning, if you bring in your promotion planning into Anaplan as well, we can start to strip out the effect of those promotions and then obviously plan new promotions for next year. and then the statistical forecast is only going to take the revised data. So once you've taken out the outliers, explained why they're outliers. For example, here we've got a list of preset reasons as to why you might have an outlier in terms of the demand for that SKU for that particular period. You can go through, tag the reasons why, and then that data won't be included in your statistical forecast. So say more detail and probably far too much to cover off in a short webinar, but hopefully that gives you the idea around the statistical forecast engine, how it works and how it flows that data through. If I just take that and move back to my demand forecast here, so all of that basically goes into our baseline statistical forecast. Anything we've done in terms of correcting outliers, changing methods, adjusting history, launching new products, for example, which I didn't touch on, but you can obviously launch new products and base them on an alternative history. So if you're launching a product that's going to act similar to one that you launched 6 months ago, for example, you can choose the data and amend it where you want to. That may be done centrally. You may let the individual demand planners go in and do that by SKU, but essentially we're working through to this baseline. What we then have is obviously the ability for a demand planner to go in, just see their data as part of the dashboard, and then make their adjustments to it. So here we have risks and opportunities. These are done at a higher level. So maybe a fall due to lockdown of 10%, for example. If I turn that on, you see we start to get a variance against our baseline statistical forecast. If I turn on a few more of these, so different promotions we might run, bank holidays, whatever the impact is that we want to plan for, I can list them out in this detailed way, choose a start date, an end date, an adjustment method, put in any comments and things that I want to add in here as explanation, and do it as a kind of a detailed build-up. And you can see again the variation between our baseline forecast, that's the blue one, and the demand forecast here, that's the green line, or obviously just simple data input, so I can go across, change my numbers where I want to. If you'd rather have it as just an override rather than adjustment, all of that is completely up to you. You can choose your logic, and you enter in your demand forecast either against, in my case, 3 different scenarios, so a best case, worst case, expected case, and actually have the individual demand planners fill out all 3, or you might just say fill out an expected case and we'll do some top-down adjustments, or actually let's assume it's 10% higher or 10% lower, and create new scenarios centrally rather than the individuals filling out that forecast. Once they've completed their work, we have other dashboards just for kind of analysis points of view. So if I click through, we can see a comparison of scenarios. So obviously once the data is actually in Anaplan, you can choose to view it, slice it, pivot it, however you want to. It's all the same data, the same database. There's no risk of numbers not pulling through correctly. This statistical forecast number that's pulling through here, or the adjustments that have been made, will always be consistent across all of Anaplan. And here we have the idea of now seeing our 3 versions side by side and seeing the difference between them. So you can see our expected case, best case, and worst case here on the chart. And everything that I click on here is context specific. So if I click on scenario 2, my table down the bottom here with different adjustments, risks and opportunities is relating to scenario 2. If I click on scenario 3, it switches to scenario 3. So you'll see me do that more as we move through. Anywhere where I click up above here, it's going to sync the rest of the dashboard to that particular item, be it a product or be it a scenario. Just makes it really easy to drill into detail without having to search for different dashboards. Okay, so that takes us to the point of completing our 3 scenarios by kind of product and location level that we have here. As far as workflow and submission goes, obviously you can have overall commentary that goes alongside with the dashboards. You can have emails sent directly to managers, for example, but you can also choose what you actually want to submit. So in my case, I'm submitting all 3 scenarios. So if I move through to the next step of our process, which is a top-down allocation, we have all 3 scenarios coming through to that next step of the process and then beyond into the supply plan. If I come back a step here and say, actually, I've done the 3 for my own kind of sandpit, my own workings, but I only want to submit scenario 1, for example, you can then feed that through. And then on my next step, I just have scenario 1. So if you imagine you maybe have 20 demand planners all doing multiple different versions of their own scenarios, they each might pick the one that they want to submit. And then that's the one that will form your kind of combined forecast at the end. I won't go into huge detail on this dashboard, just giving timings, but effectively we're taking that forecast that we agreed at the product level and then allocating it down to individual customers. So you can see here, different channels, different customers, using some kind of history. So where we have the historical data imported, using that as the basis to do our allocation, but again with the ability to override. So our historical percentage for the website was 14% of sales. If I override it to 20, I can do so, and it's just reallocated here all the other percentages based on that adjustment that I've made. So the total is still 100%. I can make those changes where I want to. This, in this case, also drives things like distribution centers based on customer location, for example. This, obviously, everything we've done so far, just in the interest of time, has just been for demand planner. If I pull across kind of the contents page of a demand planning model, for example, you can see here you also have the idea of cross-functional forecasts. So rather than just having the demand planning but a forecast together, if you want to have it where marketing do a forecast as well with various promotions, if you want to have finance do a forecast, maybe and then agree on a consensus plan, either with some kind of weighted average or just as a manual review once you've seen that input from other people. What Anaplan also allows you to do is obviously keep all that history. So if it comes to the point where you've got your statistical forecast, you've got the adjustments that people made, you've got marketing's adjustments, when the actuals start to come in, you can obviously compare those actuals versus the different scenarios that you put together and actually see things like forecast accuracy, how much more accurate did it make it when people input their adjustments versus the statistical forecast, and again refine it so that maybe next year you don't spend as much time on certain products or certain regions and you focus your time where you were further off in terms of forecast accuracy last year or last week, for example. Okay, so this is kind of bringing us to the end of the demand side. So we've allocated down to individual customers. We have now by week, by product, by customer, a detailed demand plan that is now going to feed through into our supply side. If I open up the supply piece here, let me just open up the kind of the overview first. This particular model that I've got as a demo model covers kind of inventory planning, so around replenishment, safety stock, etc. Baseline production capacity, so actually where should we produce things, which production plants, and it then goes into more detail around individual production lines, for example. Again, just because of time, I won't have time to show everything, but obviously we're happy to follow up demonstrations, deeper dives where needed. If I look at the kind of replenishment side first, taking that demand plan through, first thing we have is again kind of an inventory policy set based on our product segmentation. So in the same way we can segment products for the demand planning side, knowing what to focus on, we can do exactly the same concept here for the supply side, either with exactly the same segmentation or a different one focused on the supply metrics that we want to. And then you'll see here some assumptions here actually set based on those categorizations. So target reorder level, how many weeks to look forward, weeks of supply to have, for example. We can set those based on these categories, or obviously if you want to, you can set them right down to individual SKU level. That's your choice. If I come through to actually one of the replenishment dashboards here, so from our demand, when we've allocated that down to individual customers, that's actually already done for us an allocation down into distribution center. You can see here I've got 4 different distribution centers that I'm looking at. And if I look at this product here, let me just take off our data to start with. Let me just remove these. So if you imagine you're starting from scratch, you have the idea of some kind of opening stock on hand. So you see here we've got 2,700 units in London for this particular golf club. But then very quickly, as our planned demand that runs across the lines here comes in, we're running into negative stock effectively, which is obviously an issue. This demand, as I mentioned before, it's all linked. So as I change the demand in week 18 for this particular SKU, for example, this number will instantly change and we can get an instant reforecast off the back of it. This replenishment example, I'm going to show you more of kind of the manual intervention way, and then we'll look at what we call Optimizer on the production side. Some of our metrics that we've got coming through here, those things like lot size, if you have minimum order quantities, maximum stock maybe, a service level you're trying to attain. You can choose as well as things like shipping method, shipping cost. This is all feeding into our table down the bottom here. And you can see Anaplan actually recommending when you should have reorder quantities arrive, and therefore when you need to place that order, and also what the quantity should be. So based on either an order multiple, an order quantity, using that to recommend the suggested receipts. And what I can do here is just go along, say that I want to approve that reorder quantity. I could just choose to accept what Anaplan is suggesting. And you'll see here, we're just bouncing here above the safety stock target. Or if I want to, obviously, I can still go in and amend it. So I can say, actually, rather than ordering 4,800 units, let's go for 6,000, for example. In this particular example, we're assuming that we're importing finished goods from somewhere else. If you want to do a bill of materials breakdown, take the demand for a particular product, break it down into raw materials, and then do the replenishment at a material level, obviously you can do that as well. And there's other examples that have that built in. If I just tick through here, you can see what we're basically building up here is when we should actually do our replenishment. We have the primary shipping method for that particular SKU or that particular supplier. We can override that as well if you want to. So currently we've got a 2-week lag for a truckload. If I change this to air instead, that's only 1 week, so it brings it forwards. Actually, here's where we raise the purchase order, but the cost of air is more expensive than the cost of truckload, for example. So all sorts of levers and things that you can pull when you're doing your replenishment plan. And importantly, you choose level of detail. So here I can do a completely different plan by SKU, by distribution center, and importantly, across the different scenarios. So if you actually want to do a full supply plan for best case, worst case, expected case, do that in advance and have them ready to go. You can also do that as well. And then the idea here is once you've built this up, you can then do an export of your purchase orders to then feed back into your operational system, for example. Okay, so that's a high level, obviously, just given time. That's the kind of run through of the replenishment piece. If I go back to my contents page that I had on the supplier side here, and just take a moment to look at what we call Optimizer and how that can be used for production planning. So here we have the idea that based on our different production centers, in this case, a different list here, different countries, we've got our demand coming through. We can start to build up scenarios for production. Anaplan has what we call Optimizer built into it, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a mathematical optimization model. Essentially, the way it works is you define the inputs. Effectively, it could be the kind of restrictions, what is possible. So if there's a standard lead time, standard cost for the workforce, we're talking about hours per day, hours per week, the cost of those hours to get to a staff cost. Obviously, things like overtime being a factor when we're looking at production planning. If you want to allow overtime, is that more or less efficient than outsourcing, for example? We've got capacity constraints here, so number of shifts people can work, hours per shift. The optimizer can also be used for optimizing resource planning, so actually who you need in place and when. There's actually another model we've got as a demo model that is production planning with people in times of COVID, so with social distancing on or off, what would the production plan be? And then all the way through down into things like capacity constraints down here as well, so hours per shift across at the high level, and then down into the individual distribution centers as well. All of these are inputs into the optimizer. What you then do effectively is choose what is it you're trying to optimize. So are you trying to maximize the production? Are you trying to minimize the costs subject to certain constraints? You choose what it is that you're trying to optimize, and then Anaplan will give you the answer out the back. If I actually show you the kind of the user interface for this, say although it's a fairly complex mathematical model, the way you run it, the way you choose the variables is all very simple. This is the view that a model builder would have. These are the actions or processes that they can run. And if I come down here to our optimize the production piece, you'll see here all they have to feed in are the variables and the constraints. So in my case here, I'm trying to minimize the total cost. That's my objective based on the conditions that I set. The variables are things like quantity received, quantity shipped, standard capacity units as I move through, and then the constraints here, so transit times, if there's a capacity limit, the capacity limit on overtime, so people can't just work 24 hours a day, for example, building in all of these constraints into a single process. What that then allows me to do back on my dashboards is to create a scenario here. So I might have a certain sourcing tolerance I want to build in. I might choose if I want to allow overtime or outsourcing. In my case, I'll do a new scenario where I allow overtime, but I don't want to outsource anything. Call this, let's call it overtime as a new scenario, for example. Choose to run my optimization, and it's going to give me a new production plan with costs based on all of those constraints that I've set there. You can see here we've now got our overtime scenario. So just like that, I've created a brand new scenario. We can see our transportation costs, assembly costs, overtime as being about £4 million. In this one, Over here, for example, we obviously didn't allow overtime, and therefore instead we've used an outsource. So we have a higher cost here for outsourcing than we do for overtime. So it allows us to compare these scenarios really quickly. And if I go to the results here, we can see some more details by scenario. So if I choose my overtime scenario that we just created, I can see here the shipped quantities, the receipt quantities by the different locations based on the optimization process that I ran. And this also goes all the way through. If I choose maybe this one here, this goes right down to production lines as well. So if you want to do the same optimization, which goods can be produced on which production lines, how long it takes them. So we've got time elapsed here, for example. You can use that same optimization process on production lines. Or I already mentioned the idea of using it on staff as well. So based on the shifts when people can work, you can actually use it for shift scheduling. So even outside of supply chain, we have a lot of customers that use it for things like call center planning or retail staff planning. You put in the variables for who can work which days, which shifts, how many hours, etc., and it'll actually do your staff planning for you as well. Not that I've got time to go into today, but both these sides, obviously we just saw a bit of cost here on the supplier side, they can flow through directly to finance as part of more of a kind of an S&OP model, and you can see that impact straight away as well. Okay, so I say apologies, time is against me going into too much detail here. If there are any questions I can answer, please use the question pane. Obviously, we're more than happy to do more detailed demonstrations on either demand, supply, or both. Typically takes about an hour and a half or so to go into more detail. For now, just given the time, I'm going to flip back to PowerPoint, and if there's any specific questions, and just to close out with a couple of slides here. So in terms of kind of the Anaplan platform for connected planning, so it's proven, so it's being used by about 1,600 customers now, I think, across the world. I mentioned across all industries, across different use cases. It's what we call innovative, so you have a lot of kind of legacy systems, the big players in kind of the tech world, where obviously they can handle things like the scale, they've got the audit capability, but typically very hard to be able to adapt, to create new scenarios, to run what if analysis on the fly, and obviously to be owned by the business. Anaplan being new technology, literally developed in the last decade, the user interface having a refresh literally in the last year. It's very easy to use, very easy to be owned by the business. And importantly, it has those different use cases. So although phase one might be a small project, you decide to focus on demand planning, for example, or taking a final demand and feeding that through into a supply plan. As you have the licenses, you're not restricted as to what you can build. So if you then want to build out into finance, into marketing, bring in promotion planning, for example, into the demand plan, you can do all of that yourself. It's exactly the same platform. It's not different systems being bolted together. If you understand how to build one model, you can then build the rest yourself, obviously with help from ourselves at Bedford Consulting. I can't see any questions in the question pane or in the chat. Obviously, I'll give you another kind of 2 minutes or so if there are any. If there's more you want to find out, there's some contact information on the screen. So either email that address, info@bedfordconsulting.co.uk, or you can go to our website as well and request a demonstration directly through there. There's also some information about the Anaplan platform, what it can do, some case studies, etc., on the Bedford Consulting website, or obviously you can go directly to the Anaplan website as well. There's full pages dedicated to supply and demand, those case studies that I mentioned, including kind of ROI and stats if you're looking to build a business case as well. Okay, so still no questions. So in that case, I'm going to end the webinar there. Have a good day, everyone, and say don't be afraid to follow up if you have any questions using the information on the screen. Thank you very much.